that nature should direct itself according to our subjective ground of apperception, indeed in regard to its lawfulness even depend on this, may well sound quite contradictory and strange. But if one considers that this nature is nothing in itself but the sum of appearances, hence not a thing in itself but merely a multitude of representations of the mind, then one will not be astonished to see that unity, on account of which alone it can be called object of all possible experience, it is nature, solely in the radical faculty of all our cognition, namely transcendental apperception, and for that very reason we can cognize this unity a priori, hence also as necessary, which we would certainly have to abandon if it were given in itself, independently of the primary sources of our thinking. Immanuel Kant. I talked for the last 2 lectures about the role the intellect has, according to Kant, in the process of cognition. And I said that all our thinking is an act of making connections, of synthesizing, of forming a raw, chaotic material. And I said that the intellect, according to Kant, creates a synthetic unity. I talked about the apperception, that is the intellect creating a synthetic unity of our various representations, uniting them by thinking them as being representations in the consciousness of one and the same subject, by always saying I think this, and thereby creating that subject, that identity of always the same I. And I also talked about apprehension, that is our power of imagination, but directed by the intellect, under the intellect's influence, bringing synthetic unity into our various sensations, our various sense impressions, thereby making it possible to perceive them, because a perception is not just a chaos of sensations, but rather there is already some unity in that in those sensations. But of course, the true role of the intellect is to understand. In fact, the German word for intellect is Verstand, and the German word for understanding is Verstehen. So the Verstand is that which verstehst. That is a little bit lost in English, but because intellect is not really an originally English word, it comes from the Latin. But here the same is true. Intellegere means to understand, and so the intellect is that which understands. I think there are also translations of Kant works where Verstand is translated not as intellect but as understanding, which I guess would also work. But the point is, only through our intellect can we actually understand what we have there. The apprehension lets us perceive things, but a perception is still only sensual. I have an image, I see something, but I don't know what I see. I mentioned in previous lectures, I mentioned Kant's example of a savage seeing a house. He may see it very distinctly in all its details, but he has no idea what a house is, what it is for, what people do with it. So we need the intellect to understand. Once again, the intellect in general always brings synthetic unity. And here what the intellect does is bringing synthetic unity into our various perceptions and thereby connecting them and turning them into experience. And that is indeed the third step in the whole process of experience. So we have the apperception, we have the apprehension, and now we have what could be called intellection. So that is a word that Kant doesn't use as frequently as the first two. I think he doesn't use it at all in the Critique of Pure Reason, but it can be found in his notes, and I think it is fitting to better see that these are three steps belonging together. So only through the intellect connecting our perceptions do we get actual cognition. And what cognition is, I already mentioned this in a previous lecture. What cognition is to Kant is it is an objective representation. So a perception is just a subjective representation, right? I have a certain image in my mind. For example, I see a tree or a house, but that doesn't mean that I have cognition of that tree or of that house. That doesn't mean that I have experience, because I could be dreaming, I could be hallucinating. For now, it is just a subjective image in my head. It only becomes cognition, Kant says, when I make a relation between that perception, that image in my head, and an object outside of me. And of course, if that relation is correct, I mean, I can also be wrong. I can be dreaming and thinking that I'm awake. But if it is correct, then I have actual cognition. Now, there can be pure cognitions, meaning cognition that is without anything empirical in it, like in mathematics. And on the other hand, there can be empirical cognition, and that does contain, obviously, some empirical element, and that empirical element is sensation. I talked in my previous lecture on sensuality and time and space as forms of viewing. I talked about how sensations, how sense impressions, they are the content of all our perceptions. So they are exactly the empirical part that Kant is talking about. Because if you take them away, what you have left is only the pure forms of sensual viewing, that is time and space. And what you have left is our intellect's concepts, like the concept of a triangle, for example, if we stay with mathematics. But the empirical element is the sensations, and that means that empirical cognition is cognition containing sensations of some sorts, colors, sounds, smells. And this empirical cognition, Kant says, is experience. So empirical cognition and experience to him mean one and the same. And in a way, this is the actual cognition to him. Because once again, cognition means that the image we have, the representation we have, is related to an object. Well, how do we get to that object? Only through empirical data. That's kind of Kant's whole point in the Critique of Pure Reason. That's why we can't have cognition of God, because I can think of God, I can have a concept of God in my head, I can have a representation of God, but I can't, this is subjective. I can't make it objective. I can't relate it to an object, because even if there is such an object outside of me as God, I have no empirical data of God. that allows me to relate my representation to that object. So really, actual cognition, since it is defined by Kant as an objective representation, and since I only get objects through my sensations, actual cognition needs sensation. Even the pure cognitions, like the mathematical ones, Kant says, can only be considered cognitions because they themselves may lack empirical data, but they can, so to say, be applied to the empirical, right? So even if I had never seen something shaped like a triangle, I could, of course, still think of a triangle and still do geometry in my head, so to say. But Kant says, in that case, I could still conclude that there could be a thing in the world shaped like the triangle I'm imagining, and I would still know that everything I realize about the triangle in my head, like the fact it has 180 degrees and so on, would have to apply to a real triangle shaped thing. If that wasn't the case, so if we could do some mathematics, some geometry in our head, but we could not be assured that something like that could be an object of experience, even if it isn't an object we have experienced so far, it could potentially be an object of experience. If we couldn't say that about our pure mathematical cognitions, Kant says, then they wouldn't really be cognitions. Then we wouldn't know if they can be objective or if we are just subjectively making random stuff up in our head that has no reality in the world, so to say. Now, anyways, the important point about experience, about empirical cognition, is that as a cognition, it is done by the intellect. It needs sensuality, of course. It is the intellect being applied to sensuality, but it is still done by the intellect. Sensuality alone cannot understand things. If we just perceive an image, that's not understanding it. We may see something but not know what we are seeing. Understanding is done through a judgment of the intellect. That is exactly why we can go wrong. Because I talked about this in my lecture on Kant's critical method, how error works according to Kant. And Kant points out that sensuality as such can never be wrong. Even if I see something that doesn't exist, if I see white mice because I'm going crazy, that image as such is not wrong. If I see them, then I see them. If somebody tells you that he is seeing something or hearing something, you can't really deny that. I mean, unless you have reason to believe he's lying, of course, that's a possibility. But if we assume he's being honest, then that's it. He's seeing what he's seeing. But the thing is, that is just a subjective representation. To make it cognition, to make it an objective representation, we need to relate it to an object. And all relations, all connections, all judgments come from our thinking. So if you actually think about it, very, very little is really part of our sensations. People, because unaufklärt people, they have this victim posture. They always think they are passive, and they always sort of hide their own activity from themselves. So people tend to believe that they sense, they see, they hear, they feel, whatever, much more than they actually do. So, for example, Kant points out that all sensation is positive. You can only sense that something is there. It can never be negative. You cannot sense that something is not there. So I can sense my t-shirt being wet. When I look at it, I have the wet sensation. But I cannot sense that it is not blue. The wetness, so to say, is an impression I have, but the not blueness is not an impression I have. That is a judgment I make. My intellect says I only have the red sensation. I don't have the blue sensation, therefore it isn't blue. Just like I cannot sense being alone right now. If there was someone with me in this room, I could see that person. Now I can't see another person, so I make the judgment that I'm alone. But I can't see the aloneness as such. That is not sensual. That is already an act of the intellect. Also, with Kant, we could say that we also don't ever sense and therefore don't ever perceive objects. What we sense are sensations, are, to say it in the philosophical language, are not substances, but the accidents of substances. So I don't sense the t-shirt as such, I sense red. I don't sense sugar as such, I sense sweetness. It is once again my intellect judging that there is an object causing that sensation. Or to give a third example, all sort of distances. People may believe that they perceive distance, that they perceive how far or how close something is, but really that is a judgment we make. Once again, you can clearly see that from the fact that you can be wrong here. When it comes to sensations, you can't be wrong. When you say I see red, then you see red. But when you say something is, 10 meters away, it could be that maybe it's only 5 meters away. We can best see that in very, very young and newborn children. They try to grab something which they see, even though it's too far away to be grabbed, because they have no real understanding yet for how far or close something is. We need to learn that in the course of our life. Now when we seem to see that something is far away, really we are judging it. Like maybe we see a mountain or a house, and we are judging, for example, that, of course not consciously judging, unconsciously and immediately judging, but still judging. We are judging this is, for example, too small to be a house, so it must be a house in the distance, and it must look small because it's far away from me. But that is something we first learned. The important point to understand here is that experience is not something purely sensual. It is something intellectual. It is something requiring a judgment. Kant therefore stresses that you can't have experience. He says that's a wrong way of speaking. You can have a perception because that is, so to say, something that happens to you, something that you just get by, for example, seeing something. but you cannot have an experience. You can only make an experience. It is something you do. Because, once more, an experience is a type of cognition. It is empirical cognition, and all cognition is objective, is relating an otherwise subjective representation to an object. And that is something that you do. So, to take one example of Kant's, if you look at a red tower, you don't really perceive that it is a red tower. What you perceive is the color red on the tower. That is your subjective perception. That is in you. But that is not really an experience yet, Kant would say. An experience is something that is necessary. So now all I could say is, in me, the red color is connected with the tower. I can't say it's yet. I can't say yet it's connected with within the object. I can only say it's connected within me. So it's a subjective connection. 2 lectures ago, in my lecture on the apperception, I talked about the difference between transcendental and empirical perception, right? And I said that in empirical perception, various representations can be aggregated or associated. I gave the example of a certain song that makes you sing of a certain person, because of something that happened in the past that made you make the connection between that song and that person. That doesn't mean that they are objectively connected, like out there in the world, but rather that in you, the representation of that specific person and of that specific song happens to be associated. That is just your in your empirical apperception. And so therefore it is only true for you, not necessarily for other people. And the same would be true here if it was just a perception. I could only say, in me, the red color is associated with that tower. I personally, maybe not someone else, but I have both representations together. But now, if you judge that the red color is not just associated in me with the tower, but rather it is connected with the tower in the object, then you make an experience. Because now perceiving them together is not subjective anymore, it's objective, and it is necessary. Now what you are saying is, I don't just happen to have both representations together, I have to have them. I cannot possibly look at the tower and see the tower without also seeing red, because the tower is red. Like, of course, the tower could be repainted and then I could look at it without seeing red, but right now, if things stay as they are right now, it is not possible for me to see the tower without seeing red. And not just for me, but also for everyone else. That's what I'm saying, if this is actual objective experience. I am saying everyone who looks at the tower has to see the color red. So now this connection belongs not to the empirical apperception, but it belongs to the transcendental apperception. So not to being this specific me, Jonathan Löwer, with this character, with these associations that I may have, but rather belonging to an I, to a thinking, perceiving, experiencing, representing subject in general. Now what I'm saying is, it is not possible for one and the same subject to perceive that tower without also, as the same subject who perceived that tower, perceiving the color red, or the other way around. It is not possible to perceive that redness without the same subject who perceived the redness also perceiving the tower. That is what I'm saying. I'm now saying this is a necessary connection. This is a connection in the object. This belongs to my transcendental apperception. Or likewise, one other example of Kant, when I have a stone lying in the sun and I touch that stone and I find that it's hot. That is just two perceptions. Like I perceive the heat on the stone, and I perceive the sunlight shining on the stone. Once again, that would just mean that in me, subjectively, these two perceptions are associated. I happen to have the representation of heat, while I'll also have the representation of the sun shining on that stone. That would not be experience, because there is no necessity in it. I'm not saying the stone must be hot. And I haven't really learned anything, because it could be a coincidence, right? It could be contingent, and therefore I don't really have knowledge now. I can't do anything with that knowledge. Like it doesn't help me through life. But on the other hand, if now I make the judgment, the stone is hot because of the sun. The sun warmed the stone. Then for one, this connection, it becomes necessary. I am once again saying I must, if the sun shines on the stone, then I must, when I touch it, feel the heat. They are connected in the object, not just associated by me. And I'm also saying everyone must feel the heat when touching the stone that light in the sun. And also now, since it is an actual experience, now I actually learned something. Now I actually have new knowledge that I can do something with. Like for example, now I can be careful not to touch stones or a black car that stood in the scorching sun all day, because I know that I might burn myself. Or now I could know that I can put my laundry and could put it out in the sun, could hang it into the sun so that it dries faster, right? That is what experience means. I learn something about how the world works, about the laws of the world, and that allows me to work with that, to apply those laws. And here we see that for experience, the intellect is needed. In fact, what is needed is certain concepts of the intellect, pure intellectual concepts, that allow me to make experience. Those pure intellectual concepts Kant calls the categories. I will not talk about them here in this lecture. That is something for lecture coming soon. But I will already mention it here. He calls them the categories, and he says there are 12 of them. So to just show that with the two examples I just used, when I say the tower is red, I have the category of substance and accidents. So I'm saying the tower, the substance, the thing, is red. It has the accidents, the attribute of being red. And when I say the stone is hot, then again, that is substance and accidents. But when I say the stone is hot because of the sun, then that is the category of causality. Um, and the point is that all 12 of these categories, they are concepts of the intellect. They are not something that I perceive as such because they are not sensual. I cannot perceive that something is the attribute of an object, that the red color is an attribute of that tower. I can only perceive the red color at the tower, but not that the tower is red. And likewise, I cannot perceive because. I cannot perceive that the stone is hot because of the sun. I can only perceive that the stone is hot, and actually not even that, because that would be substance accidents again. I can only perceive the heat on the stone, and I can perceive the sun shining on the stone. But to say it is hot because of the sun, to say the sun caused the heat, and the heat is the effect of that cause, that means using one of those pure intellectual concepts I have, using the category of causality to make a judgment and thereby an experience. All our experiences depend on those 12 categories, but once again, those I will talk about in a future lecture. For now, I want to keep talking about experience and about concepts in general. For Kant, this, so the fact that experience is not something purely sensual and therefore purely passive, purely receptive, but rather it depends on our thinking, on our judging, therefore on our spontaneity, on our self-activeness. This fact to Kant also explains why we can't remember the first years of our childhood, because we didn't yet make experience. Now, most people would, of course, say that children make experiences from the moment they are born. But here you have to abstract from everyday language. You have to realize this is only because people don't really differentiate between experience and perception. Surely babies, from the moment they are born, or even before, have sensations. They see, they hear, they feel things. Now, those sensations as such it would be a lawless, a chaotic manifold of colors, smells, sounds, and so on. It requires, as I talked about in my last lecture, where I talked about apprehension, it requires the power of imagination under the guidance of the intellect, apprehending these sensations in order for them to become perception. But even then, even when they are perceptions, even when there is some sort of synthetic unity in the empirical impressions that we have, that doesn't mean that they are understood yet. That doesn't mean that we yet know what we are perceiving. So once again, it requires the intellect connecting these perceptions into experiences. Otherwise, I just have an aggregate of perceptions, but actual experience is a system. And that is lacking in the first years of childhood. First, the perceptions are more disconnected. There is no order yet, no law, and only as the child grows older does it start making connections, finding laws, understanding the world. But anyways, I think that this whole understanding of experience, of what experience is and how it works, this is very important and has very important implications and consequences. And I wish that people would take up this Kantian understanding of experience. Because now they have they live in their victim posture. They think that experience is purely passive. It's not something you make, but something you have. And that leads to many errors. So, for one example, take the very common and completely socially accepted, including by those people, like by the left and woke people who claim to be against all sorts of racism and so on. Take the very common and accepted racism against children or against young people in general. It is very often justified by experience. Again and again, children or teenagers, or even people, even in my 20s, I still had to hear that. Again and again, what they say is brushed off. Their concerns, like when they protested with Fridays for Future, for example, their concerns are brushed off. Their demands are brushed off by the claim, oh, you lack life experience. You don't have my life experience yet. Now, what's interesting is that most often this is said when the matter is about morality. So when the young person makes a moral demand. And here it's especially stupid, of course, because morality is not about experience at all. Experience can only tell us what is or what has been so far, but it can never tell us what ought to be, what should be. But even with that aside, the issue here is that the people imply, the grown-up people imply that when you are young, you have less experience, and you only gain experience as you grow older. As if that was something that happened automatically. So if I am 40 and I'm talking to someone who's 15, I can just say, oh, you have no life experience. I have more life experience than you. I don't have to actually do anything for having more life experience. I don't even have to prove that I actually have more experience. I can just say, oh, I am so much older than you, so I clearly have more experience than you. That is arrogant. And it is wrong. Because experience is not the same as perception. We can maybe assume that someone older has had more perceptions. Now, not even that is sure, because, I mean, if, for example, you spend all your life locked in one empty room, you won't perceive that many things. But let's say someone older has had more perceptions. That doesn't mean necessarily that I made more experiences. It means that I had the potential to make more experiences, maybe. But whether I used that chance, that's another question. Like, if you go into the woods and you find some mushroom, and you eat that mushroom, and it is poisonous, so you end up vomiting. That is not an experience. That is a perception. Now imagine someone doing that 100 times. Again and again, finding that mushroom in the woods, again and again eating it, and then the next day puking and going into the woods again to eat the mushroom again. That person if you now compare that person with another person who eats the mushroom just once or maybe twice, but after puking once or twice after eating that mushroom, judging, oh, clearly that mushroom is poisonous, and therefore deciding to not eat it again. If you compare these two people, it is not like the first person has had more experience with that mushroom. He has perceived puking more often, but clearly he seems to be too stupid to actually make an experience from it, to actually learn something, to actually reflect and realize that maybe the puking is caused by the mushroom. So the second person, despite having eaten less of that mushroom, despite having less perceptions of vomiting, actually has more experience because he actually learned something. And you can see, if we look at our world, that many people, whether it's individual people or whether it's we as a society, actually barely ever make experiences. Like, I've seen so many people making the wrong choices, making the same mistakes over and over. Like dating the same type of person over and over, and always wondering why the relationship turns to shit or turns abusive or whatever. When you could maybe just go for another type of person for once. Or always falling for the same tricks, falling for the same people who want to trick you without ever learning from it. And again, the same is true not just for individuals, but for groups, for societies. Like, you have so many fundamentalists who think that they can take the book of Revelation and make up some interpretation of what it says and thereby find out when the world's gonna end. Well, that worked so well in the 80s, and that worked so well when the year 2000 came, and that worked so well so many times. Clearly, they are not learning their lesson that this doesn't work. You can't find when the world's gonna end from the book of Revelation. And I mean, in fact, the Bible pretty clearly says no one knows the hour and the time. Or, I mean, take the current war in Ukraine. We could have learned almost a century ago that appeasement politics don't work. They tried that with Hitler. They let him get away with anything, with breaking the Treaty of Versailles several times, with annexing other countries or parts of other countries. And always they appeased him. Always they said, oh, if we just leave him alone, if we just let him get away with it, he will stop and there won't be a war. Well, that worked well until he attacked Poland, right? But still, they did the same with Putin. They didn't stop him in Chechnya. They didn't stop him in Georgia. They didn't stop him when he annexed the Crimea. And even now, especially here in Germany, where I live, there are so many people saying, oh, just let him be. Ukraine should just give up. They should give away 20% of their territory. Then he will be content and then everything will be fine again. Surely, if we do the same thing that worked so well the last times, surely he won't start another war. Those people, I don't care how grown up they are, how much older than children they are, clearly they never made any life experience. So this is just not something that you can claim, that more age means more experience. in fact, in my experience, and I'm saying that on purpose, because that is an actual experience. In my experience, those people who brush off children or teenagers or young grown-ups like that by saying, "Oh, you have no life experience," they are usually the people with the least life experience. Because clearly they just don't want to deal with whatever that young person says. If they had a real counter argument, they would use it. They would not. They would not resort to this sort of ad hominem, just saying, "Oh, you are young, therefore what you say doesn't matter." But also, this wrong understanding of experience is often used in conversations and discussions to prevent being touched, to prevent having to deal with arguments, to prevent having to change my opinion. I always like to tell the story of my grandma that stuck with me, where my dad and I had a discussion with her, and it was about the Second World War and how, when it started, the Nazis didn't immediately change to a wartime economy, trying to make the German population not really feel the war at first. And my grandma disagreed and, in fact, became quite agitated and angry, and said that there was a war economy right from the start. And when my dad pointed out that there are many historians who have dealt with that, who have written books about it, she said, and by the way, my grandma usually isn't, she's not a conspiracy theorist. She usually is not an enemy of experts, of scholarship, of science. She actually reads quite a lot of books. But still, but she just brushed that off, saying, "Oh, books. Anyone can write anything in a book. I don't need books for that. I was there, and you can't deny my experience. I have my experience." By the way, she was there as a 10-year-old girl when the war started. So here the point is, I have experience. I mean, the experience came down to, she said the butter started becoming more expensive even before the war started. But the point is, someone claims to have an experience, and therefore they don't need to deal with actual data, with actual facts, with actual arguments. Which leads me to a third point, and that is that nowadays there are people, there are ideologies, especially the woke left, who actually try to turn this wrong conception of experience into a tool for their politics or for their morals, because they will give certain rules of conduct. They will say that you must not say certain words because they are offensive. You must not do certain things because they are offensive, like you must avoid cultural appropriation. And the thing is, they will judge that, once again, with these things being offensive, so someone feeling offended by it. They will say that this and that word is racist, like you can't call people Indians or Negroes anymore, or they will say that this and that action is racist, like as a white person you can't wear dreadlocks, it's cultural appropriation, and I mean, that's a point you could make. Maybe it is racist, but then you would have to give an argument to convince me that it is racist and that I should not do it. But when I ask for such an argument, they will just say, "Oh, you are a white, cis, heterosexual man. You can't know what it feels like to be black or a woman or homosexual or transsexual or disabled or whatever. So you don't have that experience, how it is to, for example, be a black person and then see a white person with dreadlocks. You have never experienced that. You don't know what it feels like, so you can't understand. But you don't need to understand, and you have no right to demand understanding it first before you stop it. You should not stop it because you understood that it is wrong. You should stop it because you are told that it is wrong by someone who has that experience. But the thing is, racism is not something that you can just passively sense. So the way they understand experience, racism can't be experienced. Now, in the actual way we should understand experience, in the Kantian way we can experience racism, but the way they mean it, as something purely passive, purely belonging to sensuality, you can't experience racism. Like if a cop pulls over a black person but not a white person, that being pulled over, which the black person perceives, is not yet an experience of racism. If we just go by his senses, all he's sensing is being pulled over by that policeman. It needs a reflection by the intellect. It needs a judgment to say, oh, he's just pulling me over because I'm black. And of course, then it becomes an experience. But the point is that these people seem to think that merely sensing something is enough, and they don't want to acknowledge the fact that what they are claiming are not just sensations. They are judgments, maybe based on sensations, but they are judgments. And judgments can be discussed. Judgments can be wrong. And judgments can be understood and questioned by everyone who can judge at all, who has an intellect at all. So, for example, I remember at one point, some years ago, I had some discussion in the comments section, also here on YouTube. In the video, so it was a German video, but the girl speaking in the video was from immigrant parents, and she talked about having experienced racism in her childhood, because she said the family was poor, and therefore when she got presents for her birthday or whatever, she didn't tear off the paper wrapped around the presents, but she carefully unwrapped it and they kept it to reuse for the next presents. And she said that her classmates laughed about that, and that was racist of them. And, well, I wrote a comment saying that I can't see how that has anything to do with racism. So maybe she happens to have brown skin, and maybe her classmates who laughed about her happen to have white skin. But that alone doesn't make it racist. By the way, that is a general problem I see, that whenever there seems to be an attack on someone, like an individual or also a group, which may often experience racism, there is the claim that that attack is racist. But the thing is, you can still attack someone who, in other cases, is a victim of racism without racist reasons. And even if that attack is still wrong, it can be wrong for other wrong reasons than racism. Like, we could see that in the past months, especially here in Germany, that everyone, for example, who attacked Israel's war in Gaza was called an anti-Semite. But the thing is, even if you criticize or even attack Jews or a Jewish state, and maybe even if you attack them wrongly, like maybe those critics of Israel are wrong. Maybe Israel is doing everything right. Which, by the way, would be a very, very naive opinion. Like, even if we abstract from all other circumstances, to think that any government of any state is doing everything right is very naive. To believe that you could trust any government, any president, to care about human rights, whether of their own citizens, but especially of people who are not even their citizens, in this world would be very naive. But even if those critics of Israel are wrong and are wrongfully attacking Israel, that doesn't mean that their wrong reasons are necessarily racist reasons. But back to this story. So I wrote that I couldn't see anything racist in that because, of course, not tearing off the paper, but saving the paper, has nothing to do with being an immigrant. I said that I, as a German, did the same as a child. Like, we did that maybe not so much to save money. No one ever explicitly told me to do it, but I did it. Well, first off, it's just better to do that, right? Why would you tear it off? Why would you destroy that paper? It is, even if you are not poor, it is still a waste of money. It is also a waste of resources, destroying the environment more. And it betrays, well, not exactly moral disposition of character, right? Because it is always wrong to have what Kant calls the spirit of destruction, to mindlessly and carelessly destroy things. I will talk about that more when I get to Kant's moral philosophy, and then I will explain it more. But I mean, as a child, I mainly kept this paper intact because I just liked it. Like, it was pretty. It had nice designs. Why would I destroy it? So that has nothing to do with being an immigrant or being a native. And also, I wrote, it seems that her classmates laughing about her. Now, that is mean, that may be bullying, and that is certainly wrong, but I can't exactly see that it is racist bullying. But to my comments, someone responded that it was terrible how I was denying that girl's experience. Now, I could have replied maybe that it is also terrible how my experience is denied, because after all, I talk about my childhood and about me also saving that paper. But the point is, this I didn't deny her sensations and perceptions, right? I didn't say, no, you did not save that paper. No, you were not laughed at. I mean, that is not my place to deny that. If she says that's what happened, then that's probably what happened. As long as I don't have a good reason to accuse someone of lying, I don't accuse someone of lying. I assume that they are telling the truth. But when she says this was racist, this is no longer about what she sensed and perceived. This is an interpretation of her perceptions. And an interpretation, like any interpretation of a text or so, can always be wrong. An interpretation can always be up for debate. And an interpretation can be done by anyone who has intellect. Meaning, I can also interpret what she says, and I can maybe interpret it in other ways. And no, to interpret something, you don't need to yourself have perceived and sensed the things you are interpreting. I mean, if that was the case, we couldn't do history, because historians weren't there in the past. What they are doing is they, for example, look at past documents, at letters or whatever, books, articles from that time, and they interpret what the past people wrote. And interpretations must be up for debate. Like, I'm not saying that mine must always be right, but if they are wrong, you need to tell me why they are wrong. You need to explain it to me. You need to convince me. You can't just say, oh, I have my experience and that is my interpretation, but I pretend that it is not an interpretation, not an act of my intellect that I am responsible for, that could be right or could be wrong, but rather I pretend that it is purely sensual, that it is something that I just passively took in and that I haven't made, and therefore that can't be wrong. And now you have to just go along with that interpretation of mine. That doesn't work. Or at least that's not how it should work. And from these three examples, you can see that when people talk about their experience like that, while not understanding, as Kant did, that experience is something we make, and therefore can also make wrongly or not at all, this is ultimately a strategy of immunization. Like, you are immune to criticism. You are immune to counter-arguments. You can just say, no, I have more life experience than you. Whatever you say, no matter how well argued it is, doesn't matter. No, I have my experience. I was there and you were not, so you can't tell me what happened. No, I have my experience of being discriminated against in a racist way, in a sexist way, in an ableist way, whatever. So you are not allowed to say anything about that. This is Anti-Aufklärung. It is very, very much Anti-Aufklärung. And because Aufklärung is about thinking for yourself, leading yourself instead of being led by someone else. But what those people demand from you is that you don't lead yourself. You don't use your own intellect. You don't make your own judgments. That, of course, you shouldn't follow blindly. You shouldn't follow your own judgments blindly. You should discuss them with others. You should be open to have them changed, but based on good counter arguments, based on good counter data, not simply because someone demands it, claiming that they have more experience. So what these people demand from you is that you don't think for yourself, but rather you stop thinking, you stop questioning, you stop demanding proof for something before you go along with it, and rather you just follow someone else's leadership. Now, that's no better than some priest or some fundamentalist saying, when it comes to religion, saying, you have to follow my belief, you have to follow my revelation, what my holy book said. You yourself may not have had that revelation, like you are not a prophet, someone else had that revelation and claims to be a prophet, but you now need to blindly go along with it. And no, you are not allowed to question it. You are not allowed to demand actual proof for God or for this specific holy book coming from God, you are not allowed to use your reason and your own judgment. In fact, if you do that, God will just throw you into hell. You just have to blindly follow. Now, how is this wrong use of the concept of experience, how is this any better? Ultimately, these people, which is all too common in our time, these people are a-rationalists, meaning they don't believe that reason is a thing. Because clearly, to them, there is no universal reason that all humans share and through which we all can understand the same things. And if we talk about it and discuss it, ultimately come to the same conclusions. But rather to them, there is only sensuality, this passive receptive sensuality. And therefore, if you sense different things, because you were alive at a different time, because you are older and were alive for a longer time, because you have another skin color or another gender, and therefore other things happen to you, then someone who is not like you cannot possibly understand that or disagree with you. That is killing all universalism. That is killing all chance to actually talk with each other and actually create unity amongst us. It is demanding people just going along with you. And here I want to also add a warning. Two people talking like that, especially the woke left, should be very mindful of what they are actually doing, because in the end, they are not advancing their cause or their alleged cause, like fighting racism and so on, fighting for human rights maybe. So it is, as a side note, it is curious how rarely these people ever talk about human rights. It seems that when they are fighting racism or sexism or whatever, it is just about personal subjective sensitivities, and it is just about saying you must not harm other people's sensitivities, you must not offend them. But they don't seem to care about human rights in a deeper sense. But the point is, they are not helping this cause, they are actually undermining it. If I believe in universalism, which I only can if I'm not an a-rationalist, because only reason is universal. Sensuality is different for everyone. If I believe in universalism, then I can believe in universal human rights, in a universal humanity. Then I can say, even if that other person is not like you, even if you are a man and that's a woman, even if you are white and that's a black person, you still have a moral duty towards that person. Because you, since you are more than just a sensual being, since you are not just an animal whose world is just limited to his specific subjective world, since you can, through your reason, so to say, step out of yourself and assume another person's position, even if you don't have that position yourself, that is exactly why you have a duty toward that person. You can understand those other people, despite them being other. And that is exactly, since you can understand them, why you have to regard them. And even if you don't understand them, this not understanding is now your fault, because you could understand them. You have the potential to understand them. like, you can be mindless. You can just go clothes shopping without thinking of how those clothes were probably made through slave labor, through child labor in a poor country like Bangladesh. But you could know about that. Like, it's not some unknowable secret. If you actually cared, you could try to look up where the things you buy come from and what you are supporting by buying them. And that is why you are responsible here, and that is why you are guilty if you don't care for that responsibility. But on the other hand, what these people are saying is ultimately a white person can never possibly understand what it is like to be black. A man can never possibly understand a woman. A heterosexual can never possibly understand what it's like to be gay. Well, I have bad news. If I can't understand those people who are different from me, then there's no reason why I should care for them. And no one can demand me caring. I have no responsibility where I have no understanding. If my conscientiousness is silent here, and is necessarily silent, not just because I am willfully ignorant, like I haven't looked at the harm I'm causing, but rather, even if I decided to look, I could not see it. And people just claiming I'm causing harm, just telling me that they are offended, that's not me seeing it. Since I allegedly can't understand those people, since, well, basically what the woke are saying is that they are a different species. I mean, that's what it boils down to, right? In the end, they are racists, they are race essentialists, they are saying a black person is fundamentally different from a white person. But if that was true, then that would lead to the consequence that white people are not responsible for black people, since they can't understand them. You have to base your morality on universalism, on saying, no, black people are not different from white people, women are not different from men on a fundamental level. And that is exactly why the white people, why the men still have a duty towards them. But anyways, so that is one way this wrong concept of experience is harmful, because it can be used as a strategy of self-immunization. Now, what I've also often experienced is that it is used to get away from responsibility, which I guess is another way of self-immunization, but here it's not so much about not having a discussion at all, but not being bothered by arguments at all, but it is about not taking responsibility for your own opinions, for your own judgments, and also for your own prejudice. This is something, for example, you can see on the right. When you tell someone who is racist that he's a racist, often that person will claim, no, their racist opinion, of course they won't say it that way, they won't acknowledge that it's a racist opinion, but they will claim their racist opinion is not based on actual racism, it's not based on actual prejudice, but rather they will claim it is simply based on reality. They will pretend that they were completely neutral with no racist prejudice, and then they just happen to look at the facts. I mean, right, that's what those right-wingers love. They love facts and logic, and destroying you with facts and logic. They just looked at the facts, and the facts just happen to lead to this racist conclusion. And they will basically say that's not their fault, right? They love saying facts don't care about their feelings. So if you're offended that this is racist, well, I'm sorry, babe, but that's just the facts. I didn't make the facts. I'm just reporting on the facts. I'm just a messenger. But the thing is, you did make the facts. I mean, the very word fact comes from the Latin facere, which means to make, to do. So a fact is something made. It's not something that is just there neutrally, waiting for us to perceive it, but rather, like an experience, we make it. So, for example, I've discussed with people here in Germany saying that immigrants, refugees, Arabs, they are criminals. And someone told me, oh no, I'm not a racist. My experience taught me this. I was out in the street at night and some Arab guy threatened me with a knife. Now, I'm not necessarily denying this happened. Once again, if you don't have good reason to believe someone is lying, you don't need to accuse them of lying. This may have happened. But this person is claiming that prior to being threatened by this guy, he was not a racist, and this experience, as he called it, that an Arab is criminal, threatening him with a knife, that made him distrust Arabs. Well, but the thing is, this guy who threatened him with a knife, presumably he was not just an Arab. He was also a guy. He was male. He was also maybe a young man. He was also maybe poor. Maybe he was a person who likes to eat apples. Like, he has all sorts of attributes. So it is your interpretation that he threatened you because he's an Arab. You chose out of all the hundreds of attributes he have to say, well, he didn't threaten me because he likes apples or because he has black hair or because he's a man. Like, apple eaters are not criminals, men are not criminals, black-haired people are not criminals. He threatened me because he's an Arab. Arabs are criminals. And now my question is, why would you pick out this attribute of his specifically? Now, you may say, okay, apple eating clearly can't be related to criminality. So, actually, I would find that still more believable than saying that race is related to criminality. Like, the food that people eat, I would be more inclined, not saying this is my opinion, but I would still be more inclined to believe that the chemicals, the vitamins of different sorts of food, different sorts of nutrition may have an impact on how people behave, then I would be inclined to believe that it is their race. But well, maybe put the apple eating aside, but you could say that he's criminal because he's a man. I mean, criminal statistics clearly show that independently of race or of country of origin, men commit more violent crimes than women. Or you could say it is because he was a young man. Young men cause more trouble than older men. You could say it was because he was poor and had no perspective and had no good upbringing, no good education. But you chose to say, no, he's an immigrant. He's an Arab. That's why he attacked me. Now, what I'm claiming is that since you had no good reason out of all his attributes to pick out this one for an explanation, you must have been a racist even before this so-called experience. Now, this happening, this being threatened, probably strengthened your racism, but it must have been there, at least unconsciously, at least a little bit, even before, or else you would not have interpreted this in a racist manner. Like, I know for a fact that if this happened to me, it would not make me any more racist, because I don't have racist prejudices, and I know enough about sociology to know better what may have caused such criminal behavior than to think it has to do with race. So, but by claiming, oh no, I'm not a racist, I experienced being attacked by an Arab guy, and that's why I now have these opinions, you get out of your responsibility. You get out of having made an interpretation, having made a judgment for which you yourself might be judged. Because you are essentially saying, no, this is no judgment of mine, this is the fact. Well, yeah, but saying that it is a fact, that is a judgment. Facts are not something that just falls into our head. Facts are something that we judge to be. And maybe we misjudge. And maybe sometimes we misjudge out of racist prejudice. So, once again, it is important. I hope I made that clear why it is important. It is important to understand that experience is not just sensual, and therefore it is not just receptive. It doesn't just happen to us, we make it. And it is important to understand that experience is more than just an aggregate of perceptions. I can have 100 perceptions, like I can eat the mushroom 100 times and puke 100 times. That is not an experience. An experience is a system of perceptions. It is the intellect making necessary connections between the perceptions. And that can always be wrong. There I can always misjudge. And so it must always be up for discussion, for other people disagreeing with me and maybe disproving me and maybe convincing me to interpret my perceptions in a different manner. This is also why usually two perceptions are not enough for making an experience. Right? It could be just a coincidence that one thing happened and then another thing happened. To make experience, we need to repeat perceptions, maybe even actively repeat them. That is through experiment, through making nature repeat itself. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Christos Pei, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.